What I learned is you are a result of the five people that have around you the most.
I always say it's the three P's that matter the most: people, process, and then profit.
Businesses are bought, they're not sold.
Business is easy to understand, but it's difficult to execute.
The more that you give into the community and you do, you'll get it back tenfold.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with professional services and consulting firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Asad Ali. Asad is the Senior Vice President of Sales and Consulting at Maestro Group, a sales consulting company, and spearheads the strategic initiatives to accelerate sales performance, drive customer success, and elevate their consulting offerings to new heights. He's a multi-exit founder and has 18 plus years of experience working with more than 50 companies, including B2B, B2C, and professional services. He has successfully led multiple startup companies from inception to acquisition in both hardware and software solutions. Asad has a passion for creating value through collaboration and leveraging the science behind sales and negotiation. Over the last 13 years, he has taught upper level management negotiation at the Costello School of Business at George Mason University. He excels in creating unique opportunities for win-win scenarios by applying concepts from the classroom to everyday business practices. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. That was a very warm introduction, and I am happy to be here.
I'm sure I haven't done it justice to your actual journey and things like that, but I appreciate it. And it's really great to have you on the podcast today. I think you're going to be able to share some really great insights for our viewers and listeners, especially with your expertise in this area of sales and in negotiation. So I'm really looking forward to being able to dive deep into those areas. But before we jump in, hopefully I haven't said everything already, but could you, for our viewers and listeners, share maybe a brief background on your journey to where you are today, maybe some context around the exits that you previously had and the current role you play within the business now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the additional details that are relevant to our conversation is I started my first job as a retailer. I worked at a big box retail store here. The founder of Maestro Group, Will Fuentes, one of my mentors, is actually the person who hired me for my first job. And so I've worked with Will now at three different companies over the last 20 years. And so when we work strategically today and we're meeting different clients within our space and moving deals forward within their sales organizations, quite often people always ask us, it's like, have you really worked together for decades? And, and the answer is yes. He hired me when I was just about 17 years old. I was still technically 16 and I had to get approval from my school to actually be, allowed to work in that environment. Why that's relevant and important is not just because of kind of the retail background was, I paid my entire way through college, having this job, right? And I was able to do so because of the tutelage that I had and the mentors that I had that put me on a great career path, right? And kind of helped my own personal goals and how that aligned with what I was doing at work. And, through my time at George Mason as a student, coming out of that, it was just a natural segue into, number one, finding kind of what I was passionate about. And that's when I went and worked for Will the second time at a software company he started. And just the journey in between there, what ended up happening was while I was working under his tutelage again, I was able to have a front row seat while also being one of the first sales professionals at this company, which we did software for retail. Right, we kind of took our experience that we had. And within 9 months of transitioning out of my retail role, I'd become a manager then. After graduating school, they offered me, my degree was business management. So it was a natural segue into running one of the largest stores on the East Coast. And I was one of the youngest managers in doing so. But when I transitioned out of that, it was giving me a front row seat into fundraising, acquiring clients as as an emerging company. And I was, literally in the room then 9 months later at that retailer that I worked for, negotiating a contract to start a pilot with our software company. And so that was as fast of a training camp, boot camp that I was able to get at a younger age. That then, not only did it inspire me to go do my own, but it kind of gave me the very, direct blueprint. How do we start? What type of assets do you need? What type of decks are you going to present? How does that show your preparation? And how does your preparation translate into stronger outcomes in terms of the results that you want to achieve? And that's kind of what inspired me on my journey, over the last 15 years in terms of, wanting to start a company, the benefits of raising money, the cons of raising money and having others involved into the business that you're doing, having shareholders and stakeholders. Taking that journey all the way along, like what I learned was, failure happens at every stage and every level. Quite often, it's the biggest lesson that you can be taught earlier on. I had a lot of failures in my life, a lot of no's, a lot of not right now. The worst ones were the slow maybes, right, where you're not certain on what to do next and how to navigate something next. Like there's no blueprint for that or no playbook on how to navigate some of these complex situations that happen, from a founder level or from a chief revenue officer level, if you're talking specifically on sales. Quite often when you're at that level, you're wearing many hats and you're trying to balance things. What I learned is you are a result of the 5 people that you have around you the most. As I've gotten older and priorities begin to shift when you get a family, and I have a 6-year-old daughter now, and when you're looking at what you want to do with your life and how you can make an impact, I couldn't help but just kind of re-gravitate towards the people that have helped me in my life before. And I mentioned Will as our founder, but Mike Vlad, our chief client officer with Maestro, deserves a lot of credit for that as well. He was with us also in our retail days, and he's worked with Will at 4 different companies over the last 20 years. And so his experience working with him is great. But what Mike really does well is he understands humans and people a lot better than even I ever do and did, right? Even in my role of being a founder. And so when I was looking to figure out what I wanted to do next, amongst the companies I'd started and the companies I'd joined, some of the most recent company that got acquired, I ended up working for that larger company for quite some time as well as a part of the acquisition. When the dust cleared from all of that over the years, I found myself reaching out to Mike first before I reached out to Will.
Wow.
Right? Just as a friend, and hey, here's what I'm doing. What do you have going on? Kind of a thing. And within 24 hours, Mike invited me to a Zoom call, an intro call. He had me join a few client calls. He really encouraged me to understand the business and what was going on with Maestro Group, to the point where now I'm now a senior vice president with the company. And I give a lot of credit to those two. But what they do well is surround themselves with really smart, like-minded individuals that are great at their craft. Mm-hmm. We have professional writers on our team that have written books that are literally featured in the New York Times and Esquire magazine, right, and these type of publications that are reviewing our content, right? So we know what we do well, and we know what we don't as individuals, and have kind of aligned ourselves with a very well-rounded team. So I went on a tangent there, but I felt like that was kind of just from my experience. It shows a direct line, if you will, on how things kind of built and very well. What I'll tell you is it was a very up and down journey that to take us where we are here today in front of each other.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You said some really interesting things, and I think any listener listening right now the biggest lesson they could take from just that bit you said is keeping good relationships, right? And maintaining those relationships, especially with good people, and being good and just checking in with people, because you never know where the opportunities may lie. And the mere fact that Michael, 4 companies with Will, and you 2 companies with Will over a span of 2 decades speaks volumes of the caliber of person you would be and Mike would be, but also the type of person that Will is in bringing in and bringing together really strong individuals to be able to create a functioning operations in a business. So that's really interesting, I think. At Maestro now, you're obviously senior vice president of sales. Your role is to help transform sales teams into world-class organizations, from my understanding. What are the most common challenges you see in sales teams, and how do you address them specifically?
It's a great question. If I had to say what is the most common challenges that sales organizations have, it would probably begin with the right people in the right roles.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the right type of an individual at every level of our sales process? Because quite often we'll have what we might deem and consider like a rock star sales professional, and they might be our director of sales, or they might be a senior vice president. But what ends up happening is, if we don't have strong, SDR, sales development representatives, or BDRs, right, business development representatives, that are kind of controlling the top of the funnel, right, the new inbound leads that are coming in, there will be a disconnect at some point very quickly, where it will have a lack of activity that's happening to be able to kind of feed the rest of the team in the funnel. And what ends up happening is you start to look for gaps in your sales process. You start to wonder why something is not happening, when in reality, if you don't have the right individuals first running the right type of motions, where they're directly booking meetings and then doing a clear handoff process to the next person, and then executive involvement at a certain level on depending on the size of the deal. There has to be an entire kind of process in place that kind of surrounds the right people. And so quite often some organizations will have a process but maybe not have the right people, or the flip, where you might have the people, but you don't have the right process, right? And if you don't have both working in a very well type of oiled machine manner, where it's a direct rinse and repeat process consistently, something will slip through the cracks. And then the cracks will start to get bigger and bigger and bigger until somebody gets fed up with the lack of results.
Yeah.
But quite often, Saeed, that is people in organizations. So we've did a recent survey on this, right? Working with our clients. And what we do is we look at everybody in an organization that's not in sales, not in sales, marketing, operations, finance, anything alike, human resources. The percentage of people within your own company, okay, that trust sales. If you ask them, do they trust a sales professional? It's 3%. Only 3% of people would say they trust a sales professional on their own team, right? So quite often other people in an organization are looking at sales as, why aren't you doing more? This sells itself. We have a great service. We have a great product, right? We have a great offering. We have a great solution, right? Because people in the technical side of things are amazing developers. So they create, right? Amazing people in operations are moving things along. They think that it's operational. And in reality, there's a lot of, art and science that goes into that process with sales that I outlined that it's taken for granted, right?
Absolutely.
People have
Absolutely.
a very short fuse when it
Yeah.
comes to sales.
100%. I absolutely love everything you've said there, and it resonates with me personally and our organization. We obviously help with the sales side of things as well as the marketing side. I always say it's the 3 P's that matter the most. It's people, process, and then profit. Without any of those, a business does not function the way a business should. And you mentioned the 2 P's there in process and people. And a lot of the time, I think a lot of people forget about the people side of things, and people being the difficult side of things. Whether it's when you're hiring someone, finding the right person is difficult. When you're selling, you're dealing with people, and you're not always able to close an opportunity or influence a situation because people are people. And so there are skills involved in just managing people, just like there are skills involved in managing processes, creating products, creating solutions. So I think it's a really great point you mentioned there. People, as you said, have short fuses, especially for salespeople. So salespeople have a bad rap, in my opinion. There are some out there that maybe can go into a snake oil salesman kind of thing. But if you're offering something truly of value, then there's no reason why you're just bridging the gap between a buyer and someone that can solve a problem. So that's I think that's really interesting. What emerging trends are you currently seeing for professional services firms in the realms of sales, consulting, marketing? What are you currently seeing with your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because while you were speaking, there's 2 things that stood out to my mind that relate to what you're talking about. Is when we find the people, when we're hiring, when we're bringing in sales professionals into our organization, quite often a lot of the onboarding processes, training processes, when we're bringing new people in, quite often what I've seen in sales organizations is it's non-existent isn't the right word, but there's less of a training and onboarding for sales professionals that exists. Meaning, typically, it's, hey, you're new to the organization, go and shadow this amazing salesperson and sit on their calls and absorb. And while that there is value that you can get out of that, and that we do integrate into our training processes to a certain degree, we sprinkle that in. If you're not level set with everybody else that's in the organization when you come in from a sales side, if you don't have the the knowledge, the fundamentals, the basics when it comes to that, you're almost setting yourself up for failure in that regard with that person and individual. So the first thing that stands out to me is the opportunity for organizations to have a very well structured onboarding and everboarding plan for anybody that they bring into the organization. Quite frankly, in a playbook type of manner, in a person running that playbook with them, right, from a leadership standpoint. So it's coaching on best practices, showing and teaching first, being able to do what you would ask your sales professionals to do, right? Actually being able to kind of run those tasks. So that's kind of the first part of it. The second part of what I'm seeing is all around, AI today and tools in general, right? And AI is such a broad term, and it's kind of evolving across almost every industry in some way, and how that's affecting sales. I'm a big believer that that AI will never replace sales fully, no matter how great it gets, just because of the human element that's involved, particularly in B2B sales as you're growing larger to an organization. The average B2B sale, and anything that's, companies that have at least 100 employees or larger, the average B2B sale, you are going to be working with at least 7 different people on the other side as you navigate a sale. And so, how can I utilize different AI tools to optimize my process is more of what I would say is teaching today, because you have different tools that are relating to like a power dialer for our BDRs and SDRs making calls and doing outreach. The calling is still by far the number one method of booking meetings today, is what we're seeing across all B2B organizations. So, how can we still utilize some of the technology and tools to be able to help make it easier from a volume standpoint and a time efficiency standpoint on doing so? We have a Maestro Group GPT that we've launched a beta version of that we're developing further that can be, a best practices way on asking questions around sales process. I'm stuck in this deal. What's the best practice? Very specific. So, we utilize these type of tools as well to assist. One of the best practices we recommend for our account executives is always doing a call recap, 24 to 48 hours after every call, to ensure alignment, to kind of condition them that we are fast and we have a process, right? And we have a structure that we have in place. Quite often, if it's a 30-minute call or an hour call and you're doing a call recap the traditional way on listening into it and taking notes, it takes twice as long as the actual call was, because you're wanting to write down all the notes. You don't want to make sure you miss something, right? You're going back and listening to it again, these type of things. So I encourage folks out there to utilize any type of tools, that can help refine your process and help along the way to make it easier for you to do your job.
I think there's some really great points there, especially on the AI side of things, because AI, there's a real opportunity for a lot of different kinds of organizations and businesses to be able to streamline their processes. As you mentioned there, just by bringing in AI to when you're running a Zoom call, there's so many tools out there. There's Fathom, there's Fireflies, and there's so many other things where there literally is an AI note taker that comes into a call, and you don't have to worry about taking those notes afterwards. Once upon a time, you'd have to leave a meeting and you'd be like, okay, what happened in that meeting? Write the notes, and now you've got that way it streamlines and goes, okay, what is that? What was the key takeaways from the meeting, and how can we move forward in a structured process? I think also on the sales side of things, I had a conversation a few episodes ago, I should say, in a podcast specifically, where we were discussing agentic AI. And it was a great conversation. We were talking about how the possibility of agentic AI coming in and changing the way SDRs, BDRs operate, and helping them streamline their processes, because there's so many ways to be able to book meetings now where you have those opportunities to streamline and make things easier for the person, but you're still person to person, people to people, building that relationship and also closing. And so I think it's a really interesting point there. And there's so many developments that are currently happening in the market that could really improve the opportunities for a lot of businesses out there. In terms of your experience in negotiation, you specifically speak at George Mason, and you help, you provide talks there. How do you approach a negotiation in a sale, or how would you approach negotiation in any form of circumstances? Is it more of a science or is it an art form?
Great question. The answer is that it's both. I have a core belief that sales, and including specifically negotiations, you have an 80% of science and you have like a 20% of art, right? And your science is your preparation, right? Your structure, your framework, right? The level of gathering information, and how good are you at doing that? Because the more information we have in any negotiation, the better equipped we're going to be in navigating that particular deal. Okay, so the 20% of it is the art, where it's you, authentic, yourself, how you're applying your abilities into your framework and able to navigate, right? And that's how you show up to a particular meeting, the level of, if it's an in-person, what type of impression are you providing? The type of, do we have a presentation ready and prepared based on where you might be in a negotiation, right? Every example is a little different in terms of what could happen, but the commonalities are always how well you're prepared, because that will also base what are your thresholds, what are the concessions that you're willing to make. And that's not just relating to price. Quite often we think that the world works like Shark Tank does, where you go in and you present and we start at 50% and I offer 20% and we're going to meet somewhere in the middle, right? And that's just not how the world works these days. In B2B sales specifically, 85% of buyers in B2B do some type of research prior to meeting with, with outside vendors or partners or whatever the case may be. And so if the people on the other side of the table, on the other side of the negotiation, are coming very well prepared and at least versed and researched into what it is that they would like to accomplish,
Hmm.
if they identify that the other side from the very beginning isn't as prepared or knowledgeable, then that naturally is conditioning that individual on the other side that maybe this individual is not as sharp, or maybe this isn't the right fit, maybe there isn't enough value that's created for us that could align almost right from the very beginning. People always tend to think negotiations are when you're getting to a contract. But there's a lot of work that needs to happen to be able even to earn that right, where you're presenting someone with a contract, with an SOW,
Hmm.
and everything that kind of goes alongside of it. When you're also doing your research, everybody else always has to have a BATNA, right? A best alternative to a negotiated agreement, meaning at its very core, right? We use our framework within Maestro called Drive. It's our way of uncovering more information, right? Each letter has a purpose. So D is for decision, R is for resources, I is for impact, V is for velocity, and E is for expectations. And each, you could unpack and have two levels. But the reason I even bring it up here is when you're talking about a bat now, what's the best alternative to a negotiation? Our framework and what we teach with our clients is we utilize our framework with Drive to be able to move a deal faster or to be able to move it off completely where it's not a real opportunity. Meaning, in some cases, our BATNA is for no deal to be made. It
Hmm.
quite often can be where this just might not be a great fit. But having that understanding from the very beginning is also critical to understand. That doesn't necessarily mean it's you lost a negotiation, right? There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser,
Hmm.
right? Quite often, that's where we get into our own way when we start to think in that aspect. We want to win, right? We want to squeeze. We want to have a victory to take back into our teams and our organizations. When in reality, the more negotiations that are aligned have a win-win scenario attached to them.
Hmm.
Because it's meaning that we've taken the time to uncover more information that can align us better with our prospects. We have a vision that we share together that we want to accomplish together moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting you say that because we always say alignment is one of the key aspects of any sale, right? If there isn't an alignment, if there isn't a fit, then as you said, sometimes the best option is to go in a direction where there's no deal that's made, especially in B2B. And when you're looking at, especially B2B sales, and I've made this mistake myself as well, running a business, is not every, you sometimes take especially at the start, you're taking everything that comes your way. But when you're growing an organization, you find that there are some businesses, some deals that are worthwhile and some that just actually are not right for you. And if you take those deals, then you create more of an issue internally than you might otherwise have done. That's why I always say if you have the alignment with customers, with prospects, then you have more of a chance of having a successful delivery period in servicing your prospects or clients at that point. In terms of then negotiation, I'm sure you've heard of the book, or I know you have, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's the biggest
Phenomenal book.
phenomenal book, one of my favorite books. It's one of the biggest negotiation books that are out there, and I'm sure most of our listeners and viewers have at least heard of it if they haven't read it. And if you haven't, go read it. It's a great read. Has that book and how has that book influenced you and your negotiation strategies and sales strategies? And if it has, what are some of the tactics and techniques that you might say should be used by salespeople or
Yeah.
anyone?
Yeah, two huge fundamentals. One of them I just touched on is the level of preparation
Yes.
that you have to have going into it, on being
Hmm.
able to collect information and being
Hmm.
able to kind of have an understanding on what would be most important to you,
Hmm.
on what you'd be able to accomplish, but also putting yourself into the seat of the person across the table and understanding what's important to them, right? And having to be able to look at it that way. And then the second aspect of it that I truly love is the ability to be creative in managing a deal and managing a process, right? Quite often, I mentioned earlier, it's like, oh, people always think that we're negotiating price. But what I've seen in my own experience that the book teaches a lot of is that there are other factors outside of just the price itself that matter substantially when you are working with a client. The sensitivity around price is something that I've gone very keen in understanding, and that it relates directly to B2B sales. And I'll explain is that what we've seen in our own research is that, and this is supported by Gong, the software company that listens and records calls for sales professionals. They had a study that listened to tens of thousands of calls. And what they wanted to kind of search and derive out of these calls was what are common tendencies that lead to better successful outcomes when it comes to sales. And when pricing is brought up earlier on in a sales process in B2B sales, earlier on, not an exact quote, right? But when you're discussing pricing earlier on, it leads to better outcomes 10% of the time. So if we were to go and talk to CEOs and CROs across the country, and we said, if there was a way to increase your sales and your numbers today by 10%, we could get a 10% uptick. There's one thing we could implement. Almost all of them would say, yes, of course, we want to be able to implement. And it's the conscious ability and understanding to bring price up earlier to ensure alignment. And the book it references that more about along that there's other variables outside of price that matter. To me, bringing it up earlier and how I would apply the lines from the book into real life is that it's that because there are other factors more important or as important, why don't we get to them quicker? And so if we can address price earlier, right, some type of discussion around it, now it allows me to get more creative on maybe the terms of the agreement, the length of the agreement, usage requirements. How am I presenting my options in pricing? Inherently, us as humans, we see three options and we see good, better, best, right? We see two options and we think good or bad, right? And if we see four or more options, we start to get a little overloaded, right? It's too many. So, it's a lot to kind of cipher and think through. So how we can take some of those kind of concepts from that book, but how can we then apply it strategically into like a step we do and improve that way? To me, that's what fascinates me in terms of that.
Yeah.
Where academia meets real life, right? Because it's not as far away as people think.
Yeah, especially the psychology side of things and the behavioral psychology that's required, understanding behavioral psychology to the point where you can help decisions be made a more consistent basis. So, for example, the pricing that you mentioned there, just simply price anchoring at a higher, for example, what Starbucks do with their venti coffees versus all the others. They want you to be going for the middle option as well as the really large option. They don't want you to be going for the small option. And so the price anchoring that they do and the way they play with price makes you feel like you're getting more value from it. And that in itself, and there is a real beauty and art behind the psychology with it. And when you marry the two together, you can get some really great results. And you can see it with some of the largest organizations. So if they're doing it, then you know that there's something right about it.
I think Starbucks is doing a few things right.
Yeah, absolutely. So Asad, you've exited businesses previously before working with Maestro, and this is a podcast about growth, about entrepreneurship, about being able to strive for more and gain insights. Can you walk us through the process of preparing a business for acquisition and the key negotiation strategies that you may have employed to get what you needed to or what you wanted to at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. What I will first say is businesses are bought, they're not sold, right? So constantly, we start with the opposite in mind when we start a business. It's, I'd love to build it. I'd love to maybe ultimately either, go public one day, or I'd love for somebody to buy us, right? And have a big return on you hear all these different acquisitions that happen in the space. What I learned from in my failures before in starting the business is that I applied in the event ticketing business that I mentioned to you, my Event Nation. So I'll give you a specific example in that regard. What we were focused on from a founding team when we started an event ticketing company here in DC was that you have players like Ticketmaster in the world, you have an Eventbrite of the world, you have these very big billion-dollar businesses that are doing it. And what we quickly realized was that we could carve out a niche in terms of these, companies, whether they were festivals, whether they're live music venues, and anything in between from an event organizer, that if we focused on building a great business that took care of their needs one at a time, and we just locked it on building our business, servicing our clients, that the rest would almost start to kind of take care of itself if we were making money, right? Generating revenue. And so what stood out from what we started from that company was strategic, great clients and partners and building our base from that way. In our first year of operation, we processed over $1 million in gross ticket sales. In our second year, we 3.5 times it with a very small team. We were 5 people full time. We grew to around 9 by year 1 to year 2. And we went from the DC area to New Orleans to Miami to LA through strategic introductions from people that we knew within our networks and then starting to grow business. But it was as organic as you could do because there was some outbound that we were creating. Our team was doing a lot of it, but it was us stacking small wins on top of each other to start to get to that point. Okay, then you'd have a larger one pop and you'd have a larger opportunity. To your question was, how do you then frame that from the beginning of getting it to an acquisition? The company that ended up acquiring us, Squad Up, was still operating today. In fact, I used them as my ticketing platform for our conference we just did for Maestro. They had a very similar in terms of like origin story and background. They had a two-person founder team that was based in LA, but they started at a meeting in college at Duke University. Me and the team that we had here were some people that I went to high school with, right? And that went to Virginia Tech, some went to George Mason. We came together. And why that's relevant is they had a very similar background, similar thing, but they had been doing it for a few years longer. They had raised a few $1 million in capital, and they had larger clients that were scaling already, like the New York Wine and Food Festival, Tribeca Film Festival. When Robert De Niro is one of your clients, you're doing something really well.
Yeah.
The synergy that connected us and how it ended up happening was there was an expert in the ticketing space that had navigated an exit, that had worked for Eventbrite, that was, for lack of a better way of describing, a free agent in the space. He was available and not working at any of these larger ticketing companies, that I recruited very hard to come and work and join my Event Nation and be our chief revenue officer because of the pedigree he had. His name was Diego Carlin. And so I recruited him. I flew him out to DC from California. We wined and dined him. And I thought we had an offer that he was going to accept to join our company. And he ended up joining Squad Up instead.
Wow.
Fast forward 18 months to 2 years later, Diego was the driving force in Squad Up acquiring my Event Nation.
Wow.
And so when I go back to the beginning and I talk about like relationships here, if I had not had a relationship with Diego, there would have been never even the opportunity to explore an acquisition with Squad Up and get to that road. There was a lot of things that happened in those 2 years in between, but at its core, that's ultimately what led for our synergy to get to the point where we were acquired by them. And yeah.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story, and I think the viewers and listeners will absolutely love hearing that, because I think businesses, especially nowadays where you've got social media, you've got things, businesses often dialed back as something that is a bit more robotic now. Like it feels like it's, oh, do this, do that, and you will obviously get to this point and this and that, and it seems arbitrarily, oh, that's simple, that's what you need to do. And I always say business is easy to understand, but it's difficult to execute. Right? And
sure. Well said.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? But the beautiful thing you said there was the fact that the relationship that you built with someone 2 years prior, the intangible aspect of business, right? That trust element, that relationship element was the driving force for you to be able to exit and have your business bought rather than your business sold, right? And by doing that, you're able to give yourself the best possible future for yourself because you were more intentional with the now and more intentional with your relationships. So yeah, I think it's super interesting. In terms of being a multiple founder, what motivated you to join Maestro and work closely with your original mentor, Will Fuentes? Obviously, you have a great relationship with him, but many people might be sitting back thinking, oh, what he's founded businesses, he's exited. Why is he going into an employee role within an organization? What is it about that? What was it that drove you there?
Yeah, no, so a few things, right? The first thing that stood out was, so me personally, where I was on my journey, along those lines of when I, was a founder and started these companies, what ended up happening is the week where we were meeting with the Squad Up founders in person, right, through the journey of successfully getting sold, having them acquire us, I had my first daughter, right? I have a child. I ended up getting married along the lines of the journey. And when you're running a company the way that we were, quite often when we were signing the Louisiana Seafood Festival, for an example, when we were with my Event Nation, who do you think had to go down to New Orleans and physically scan the tickets and manage the event in the box office? It was me and my team, right? And what do you think had to go to Miami and do these things? And they're very fun in the beginning, and they're very taxing as well on the body when you're going place to place, managing a client, but then also still responsible for sourcing new business. And there's a lot, right? When you're running everything in the sales cycle versus then also managing clients, and you have to wear many hats. And doing that for a few years and doing that with different businesses was awesome. I loved it. And I think there's a strong passion that I still have for that type of hustle and
Mm.
mentality. When I joined Squad Up, I then had my first taste in many years on being a part of a larger company, right? It was still a small team compared to this week. I think total we were maybe 15 employees or less total across the whole company, right? But it was different from being before where it was smaller. And so I got to see then where I had a little bit more of you call it resources from
Mm.
a planning perspective, from an operational perspective, and was able to kind of narrow my niche in on focusing on driving sales and business at the time. And then when that happened, the other detail is that Squad Up was acquired again over the last 18 months by a
Wow.
larger private equity company. So it gave me a little bit of time to kind of reflect as well on what was important to me and my family and being able to kind of look at what would my next step be and what that would look like. And the reason that I reached out to Will was because I knew, number one, it would give me very honest advice, very honest feedback. Number two, I would never be deemed or you could call it treated as like what I would say is like a traditional employee,
Mm.
right? When I think about somebody like Will, I think of somebody who's putting everybody in the best position to thrive and win.
Mm.
He'll let you be you.
Mm.
In fact, in fact, he'll embrace it and encourage it. He doesn't want a room full of wills or a room full of yes men by any means. In fact, that's not the type of people he likes to surround himself with. I knew at least embarking on reaching out that would be at least available to me.
Mm.
And it could be like a very unique opportunity where I could be in a leadership role, allow me to be myself, but also have the ability to have a very well structured team,
Mm.
having resources. And my daughter plays lacrosse. She's 6 years old. I'd never miss a practice. I never miss a game. And that's kind of consistent that we have in theme here in terms of Maestro that, whether you have a significant other, whether you have children, you have, loved ones you're taking care of, whatever your family scenario may be, that is a very true first priority, right? Is allocating time for what you do.
Yeah.
Will operates at 4 a.m. every morning. He's already up and running every day, right? This is what he does. And he does that so he can also get his work done, but he takes his son to school every single day, right? His son is a star quarterback here in the DC area of getting into high school. And he's very determined on spending great time with his son and developing him for his interests as well. That rubs off on you,
Yeah.
right? Like that rubs off on me then and wanting to kind of carry that out. So in the last year, it's even exceeded my expectations. I have no problem sharing that with you. That I thought I would be doing at least a very good role in what I'm doing. We had our first ever Maestro conference the last 3 days in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
We had over 85 tech CEOs, over 50 account executives, right? Standing room only in a lot of our sessions and meetings. And Will allowed me to have a session on negotiations for executives and how you could help train your team. I had a session called The Art of Storytelling, where I talked about the importance of telling stories. And so, that kind of feeling makes you feel like not just that you're part of a company, but you're put in a position to thrive and help and make a big difference. And I feel like I'm getting the best of both worlds now, where I'm able to call it freedom in my role and what I'm doing, but I have a team that kind of has mutually aligned goals,
Mm.
right? And everybody knows their role, and that's very important.
No, 100%. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially that it speaks volumes about having a great leader, right? And great leaders help build other great leaders rather than they're not trying to push them down in any other way, it lets them thrive in their role. So I think that's a statement to how good a leader Will is in allowing you to be able to thrive in your roles.
Absolutely.
In terms of this section of the podcast, we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. So this is a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests, and it gives the viewers and listeners an opportunity to be able to understand the mind of a leader, a business owner of sorts. So the first question in this section we always ask is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader in the business?
Long. Long day. And I mentioned Will's cadence. He's getting up at 4 in the morning. I'm not a morning person naturally. I'm not. It's a little bit more difficult for me to. I need to thaw out in the morning, is the way I describe it about myself. I take a little bit of time to get kind of up and running. So with that being said, we currently work with a large multi-billion-dollar company that has a presence in Europe and in the United States. They have many offices. And so quite often to accommodate some of the schedule that's in Europe, I'll have trainings that begin at 7 a.m. some days, right? And, we'll run those and then we'll have different coaching sessions that kind of operate throughout the day. I will say that I'm an ability where I still have control of my calendar, meaning that I'm scheduling a lot of what I'm doing. So it's providing flexibility. So some of the days where I'm longer, they're on purpose longer so I can have a shorter day to accommodate having my daughter's practice as an example,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm signing up for it, so I'm not complaining, right?
yeah.
I'm managing it my way. But yeah, we're if there's a day where I'm not having 8 to 10, maybe 10 to 12 meetings,
Mm.
then that would be considered to me a lighter day. And they range shorter in time, right? Some of them are 30-minute touches, some of them are 20-minute alignment meetings,
Yeah.
right? Not everything's an hour long or longer. But I enjoy it. I do. I thrive in it almost. It's like free time for me is the devil. The more free time I have, the lazier I get as an individual. having it where it's strategically packed, so I'm getting the most out of my days, I sign up for it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That speaks volumes. I think in terms of long days, I know from my own experience as well. We work with clients from around the world, and so we have clients in California, which is an 8 hour difference in one way, and then you got other clients in other parts of the world. So you're having a long day, and then that day goes even longer because you're working with clients from around the world. So I definitely understand. But I always say to all my clients, when you work with international clients, expect international hours.
You have to. We have a rule, the golden rule that we always have growing up here in the States is treat others the way you want to be treated. We teach the platinum rule. Treat others the way that they want to be treated. If they're international, you want to accommodate their time. If they're in California, you want to accommodate your time. I'm lucky where I'm on the East Coast, right?
Mm,
And quite often other companies do try to work alongside the stock exchange,
yeah.
right? But if they don't, that's on you if you want to be able to earn their business,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. Love it. In terms of obviously you're senior vice president of sales, what are the most important metrics for you in the business? And I'm sure every single division has different metrics that they follow. What are the metrics that you look at?
Activity.
Yeah.
Activity more than the results themselves. Are you doing your frequency of touch? And this is for even us internally. I'm lucky enough that I run our pipeline meetings internally. Some people call them financial forecasting meetings and things like that. I run those every Friday with the Maestro team, right? With Will on a call, with our chief client officer and our team. So they can get strong visibility into what's happening with our sales, right? What was the last two touches that we've had with the particular prospect? What's our specific next step?
Hmm.
And I go through every single deal flow the same way that we would do with our clients, right? And what I'm always basing off of the first thing that I'm looking at is our activity consistent? Are
Hmm.
we reaching out every 2 to 3 days?
Hmm.
Are we consistently having different touch points with our clients? Are we having alignment meetings while we're working through whether it's procurement process or getting other stakeholders involved? If you're consistent in your touches from the very beginning, then as you get closer to closing a deal, nothing changes because we're consistent.
Hmm.
Versus if I'm reaching out to you once a week, right now, once a week, and then we're getting closer to close a deal, and now I'm calling you every other day,
Hmm.
it's going to be a breaking pattern there. You're going to notice that, right? You're not going to like that. I'm going to start to be looking like that, that maybe car salesman type of mentality versus actually kind of being a true to my process and just being consistent with who I am.
Absolutely.
So consistency is what I'd say, but consistency with activity.
Yeah, I love that. It's sales speak for sure because activity is one of the driving forces of making sure the pipeline is full, right? So I
Yes, yes.
love it. I love it. How are you currently growing? How is Maestro currently growing the business? What is it that they're doing primarily? Obviously, you speak a lot about sales, but what are the activities in terms of business development as a whole to help allow Maestro to grow?
Yeah. We have never in our 10-year history now with Maestro spent a dollar on marketing ever. All of our business up to this point has been 100% referral based or derived out of speaking engagements that Will or myself have done now around the country.
Hmm.
So Will's spoken at Princeton University. He's coming down to talk at Virginia Tech here in the States, GW, amongst many of the other schools that he'll go and either speak to the entrepreneurship program. Alongside, he's a part of a large networking group here in the DC area called Mindshare.
Hmm.
That was founded by Steve Case and Ted Leonsis, two of the original founders of AOL. They created this group of like-minded CEOs that are all in the area on a monthly basis, where you talk about challenges in your business and opportunities and kind of crowdsource, ways to improve and get better. And Will is very active in that group. And we're both a part of an organization called Birthing of Giants
Hmm.
that I go and speak at as well at Princeton University that does the kind of leadership development for CEOs that do from, revenue from 5 million to 15 million a year. And they have different programs throughout the year, actually overseas as well. But I speak at that group as well twice a year where we just, we coach and train CEOs on what's happening in sales, best practices, different ways to optimize your business to be able to kind of go from your 7 to 8 figure range in revenue to ultimately like a 9 figure plus business.
Hmm.
And what we've seen successful is the more that you give into the community and you'll get it back tenfold.
Hmm.
When people are clients of ours and then they're kind of done with our engagement, we offer to coach and continue to coach our whether it's an account executive or a leader continuously for free in a lot of cases just because we have a vested interest in their success,
Hmm.
right? And some of the people we've been Will's coached somebody after our engagement ended 4 years ago. Once a week he offered them to keep coaching and the person took him up on it, and 4 years later they still meet once a week to coach,
Wow.
right? So
Wow.
I credit it to his belief in terms of like a true give back to the community that back to you in a lot of ways.
Wow.
That's what fuels our business.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It leans into the theory of reciprocity. You give, you give, you give, and you hope that something comes back. Even if you give without the hope of something coming back, often the way the universe works, things do come back in the right way. So I think that's brilliant to hear. My last question for you today, Asad, and it's been a great conversation. I think some great insights have been shared as well. If you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
It's a really good question. It's more relevant in what I'm working on today. So it's first thing that came to my mind. It's the ability to understand nuances across various cultures when it comes to relationships and then translating into like managing sales, but the relationship side of it first. And my context for it is in the last 18 months I've worked more with international teams than I have in my previous 18 years. Right. And while I have a very strong core belief on, as I mentioned, sales is art and science, right? And there's a core belief on process and there's a core belief on being authentic. The authentic piece does evolve and
Mm,
change on how people prefer to be communicated with.
yeah.
Certain nuances when it comes to cultural, English, even translations can be misinterpreted in some ways, right? Even when you're very knowledgeable about maybe a different culture, a certain word could mean something different. They're not always one for one translations, right? And we mitigate the risk in doing that on our side. We bring on different translators and we bring on different tools that we can use to help mitigate the risk. And even then, even when you're using the best, word translating tool, or even when you're using an interpreter, even then, I've seen things don't always match up one for one,
Yeah.
right? And so, if I could do a magic wand where I'm able to just understand very directly, what it is somebody else, what's very important for somebody else, or I would take that magic wand 10 times out of 10.
Amazing. Absolutely love that one. I love it. I've heard it actually before. We had a podcast with a business development consultant and they did a lot of cross-cultural work. And that was one of the big things they mentioned as well is the nuances with cross-cultural selling. Right, and someone in Germany responds to something in a different way to someone in Japan, and so is
Totally.
yeah. So there you go. Well, Asad, it's been an absolute fantastic conversation. I think some great insights. I think our viewers and listeners are going to absolutely love listening to this episode. If anyone wants to find you, yourself, Will, and Maestro, where would they go? What would they need to do?
Thank you for your time. It was a true pleasure on my side. You could just go to maestrogroup.co, maestro group.co. It's our website. If you submit any type of form or an inbound, myself and or Will both directly reach back out to you. This is what we do for any type of communication we get through our websites.
Fantastic. Asad, again, pleasure as always. Thank you very much for sharing your time today.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye now.